I look at every crisis, maybe because as as a woman in my field and in the early days, there were so few opportunities for me that every crisis, has special meaning because every crisis is an opportunity. And I think this moment is a huge, huge opportunity for all of us to reinvent, to rethink, to evolve our industry, to rethink our relationship with our art. Why are we doing this? Why? What role can art play in society as a vehicle for change? So I think it's an incredible moment to, and I hope people are willing to have this conversation. I mean, that's what worries me is that, um, the system of the establishment is a system that doesn't like upsetting because it's everyone that benefits from it is relying on it. So I don't know, Jennifer, where should we start? That's I sort of a,
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I was thinking about this when I was looking at the topic. Composers are always having to try to figure out how to adjust the situations because there's not a standard, especially in classical music, there's not a standard setup for composers to even exist in the canon. So, and I was thinking about this morning when I first came out of college. The A saxophone quartet in the area, the Prism Saxophone Quartet. Matt Levy's in that group, and he's phenomenal. I love those guys; they're incredible. They got an NEA grant for themselves and me to go around to various schools in Philadelphia and also the free library system. And I think we made like 40 or 50 trips to various places. And it was interesting because some of our audiences were kindergartners, so the 5 to 6 year old range. Some of them were college students, and some of them were actually senior citizens on some sort of senior citizen program that was like in the local library. And it was always fascinating for me and a great learning experience to watch the reactions of these different age groups. And I realized that it's important to have variety in everything you do because I noticed what the kindergartners needed was really different than what the senior citizens needed. And so by even looking at whether we were inside the city or we were out in an area that was underserved by any kind of music, I realized we had to have different kind of music. I started composing based on that, though. I remember the first saxophone quartet piece I wrote was like a 6 movement suite, and all the I guess the tempi were different, the kind of the tenor, and so the quartet started using different movements depending on what kind of audience we had. But it was the first time it really struck me that classical music is kind of on the it's a little minority in reality to the whole world of music. And the thing that really kind of triggered this thought for me, we were being introduced by a librarian at one of the places, and the librarian she said, look, welcome to the Prism String Quartet. And we were all like, what? And I was like, how is this possible that that librarian could think this was a string quartet? I mean, I remember Matt Levy looked at me and we were both like, all right, we got to recover this quickly. But we always use humor, which is one of the things I think that is most important. But I really feel like now is a time to rethink what we're doing and figure out how to move the music forward so that it reaches more people. And Marin, I don't know if you remember this, but when I was down there with you in the Baltimore Symphony and Hilary Hahn was doing my violin concerto, we had post-concert talks, and you and I and Hillary were sitting on the stage, and every single night someone raised their hand and said they thought it was amazing that there were 3 women on the stage. And I have to confess, the first night we all looked at each other like, oh, I hadn't really thought about that. But the audience, every time someone made that observation, was really applauding like crazy. And that was also a moment I thought, you know what, there are too many instances where people don't see themselves up on the stage. They don't really, and how important that is. We have to figure out a way to be more inclusive. It's a really, oh my gosh, perfect timing. That's great. It's important. I think what we do, we have to rethink this because I don't know that it's working optimally. And I'm worried about after this virus, after this huge lag time, although a lot of people are putting classical content up, and I think people are listening. I don't know how it's going to change the concert experience. I don't think it can go back, though, to the way it was. I think it could be bad. I think it might not be healthy. So
Well, I'm sure, things can always go back. That's the sad news. I mean, sometimes people just want to hang on to the past, but it's up to young people like all these people here today, I think, to really keep for pushing for change. I mean, the great thing about being a musician, and there's so many great things, but is that you don't have to do just one thing. You can put together a whole portfolio. You can do your performance, you can do some chamber music, you can do weddings, um, you can do orchestra if that's in your wheelhouse. You can teach, and you can make contributions in so many different ways and put together a life that's really very rich, I think, and varied. The I would like us to get back to the idea of music as a communal experience. Music as something that the community feels an ownership and a connection with. I think symphonic music, classical music in particular, has become so so siloed off, um, that I think of a few experiences. One, you just triggered one for me, which was when I played a string quartet concert in somewhere in Maine. I mean, really in the middle of nowhere in Maine, and we came to this unison passage, and it was really loud unison. It was a Mendelssohn string quartet. We played through the unison passage, and all the people stood up and started clapping. It was hysterical. It was like, oh, it was clear that they didn't know that that was not the way you were supposed to behave. And it was so wonderful because it was completely reactive and spontaneous. And I wish we could get back to that. I'll never forget going to a concert when I was maybe 14 and having the conductor, I remember who it was, I won't mention him, but turn around and yell at the audience for coughing. And I remember sitting there the whole time, the rest of the concert, trying not to breathe. And I thought to myself, oh, this classical music thing is really just for the birds. I can't do this. This is, it has to, for me, it has to tick several boxes, and fun is up there with it, right? Don't you feel? I mean, I think when people um, criticize me for speaking to the audience or for sharing ideas, or they criticize your music for being accessible,
mhm.
you know, I think, okay, now when did these things become bad? What do you think about that, Jennifer?
I think, yeah, you're right. And it's so funny because it used to be, I think 6, 7 years ago, reporters, I would do interviews with them and they would say, they would whisper it, how does it feel to be accessible? And I remember laughing. I thought it was kind of comical. I said, you know what? You mean it communicates? Because the reality is that's what you're wanting to do anyway. But for some reason, somewhere along the line, people seem to think that there was a problem with that. It's funny, I didn't grow up in classical music. I grew up around pop music. My parents were always taking me to rock concerts and things like that. So when I started in classical in college, I was like, wow, this is really weird. It's very tamped down. And I have to say, I have a bluegrass concerto. When that piece gets done, I love the fact that so many people in the audience kind of react to it because it's crossing a genre, but it's got a lot of energy. And it's one of the things when I'm writing any piece I think about, I always think to myself, all right, what can I do in this piece that's going to rev the audience up? Because I have to find some way to compete against Beethoven, who I seem to be paired with a lot. So I think designing a concert that you're doing a recital or a presentation, you should always feel free to think outside the box, because the fact of the matter is we're supposed to be in a creative endeavor and you're supposed to be doing that. But when I'm designing a piece, I'm always thinking, all right, this is the moment I want to grab people by the lapel and shake them and say, come with me. You have to kind of think that way. I don't follow formulas. I don't think it's necessary to follow formulas. I think the lines are kind of disintegrating too between the genres, which I like a lot. I've noticed this quite a bit. There's no reason why you can't combine different kinds of music on a program, but rethink it. It doesn't have to be some standard sort of way of doing a concert. I mean, the thing is, people remember how you make them feel.
Right.
And if you're making it a negative experience in some way, then it's not gonna, they're not gonna come back in. They're not gonna buy a ticket. They're not gonna show up again. And I think that's something you really kind of have to think through. I'm always thinking about it with compositions because I'm thinking, all right, the piece I just finished yesterday, this double percussion concerto, I really had to plan this out. I did it differently because we're in the middle of a virus. I felt like I wanted to make a really positive piece that didn't have any drums. It was all pitched percussion because I wanted to feel like I was reaching forward into a positive future. But in a certain way, all of you have to do that too. You know, you have to think about what do you want your future to look like, and you have to figure out how to make that happen. And that includes breaking rules and questioning things that have been done a certain way. There is no law that says someone's going to come chasing after you if you don't leave the stage, or you decide not to do an intermission, or you do a 1 hour concert, or you start at 6 p.m., or you play somewhere unorthodox. I think you have to think outside the box, because I fear that if we don't do this, a lot of people, we're going to lose people. People have so many things they can listen to and watch these days, and sometimes getting people off the couch to go out to a concert can be a little bit of a challenge. But if they know there's an event, something that's happening that's interesting, they're more likely to get up and go check it out.
What do you think about, what's been really interesting is talking to some of my colleagues about the stage setups, because we have to do all this social distancing now. So that for the first time, certainly in my career, you have musicians who actually have to sit in places that they're not comfortable. Musicians are often very resistant to any kind of change. And I remember with Baltimore Symphony, I wanted them to stand up during the scherzo, the violins to stand up during the scherzo of the Schumann Second Symphony at the end in the coda. Yeah. Because Bernstein did it once when I was assisting him, and I thought it was very cool. So, I mean, I couldn't even take credit for it, but I mean, the musicians were so resistant. It's not the word resistant. They felt it was really beneath them to stand up. But the great news was I said, okay, listen, I'll make you a deal. You don't have to stand up for the coda, but you have to stand up for the encore. And so they stood up for the encore. And everybody, we did a Brahms Hungarian dance, and everybody in the audience was like, wow, it was so fantastic when you stood up. There's something when you change the energy of the concert, so I'm trying to experiment now, not just with the orchestra setup, but it's an opportunity to engage the audience in a different way. They have to be socially distanced. What if we create patterns with the audience? What if we do some lighting things? What if we, there's so many things that we could possibly do. And finally, there's an opening, where musicians might be receptive to it. So anyway, I don't know what you think of that.
I think that's actually true. I think this break that we have in live concert making music may be a moment where people stop to think about this more. But I think to make this work for audiences, because that's what we need, we can't make the music in silence. I mean, I spend most of my time in my studio writing music, and it's me and the cat who's sleeping under the computer right now, actually. And the fact of the matter is, it's not going to be interesting unless it's going out into the world and people are hearing it. We want to communicate. So I think we have to rethink these things. And man, it's the perfect time to do it. It really is.
This is great that you brought this up, and because it's so fantastic that I've never understood why the first line of every mission statement is artistic excellence. I mean, isn't that kind of a given? Of course, anything you're going to do with excellence, right? But the idea of trying to strive for perfection in art just seems antithetical to the reason we make art. And so I couldn't agree more with rethinking why we're doing what we're doing. I don't think it's just in conservatory education. I think it's also in mission statements of musical organizations. Um, you know, I'm a perfectionist, of course. I'd love everything to be perfect, but perfection for perfection's sake, to me, is devoid of any kind of humanity. I think perfection is way overrated. When I listen to these auditions and the musician sitting next to me are, oh, he missed that F sharp was a little bit, and I think, are you serious? But this guy made a phrase, or the woman, I don't even know. I want someone who's touching me. It's what Jennifer said earlier. You want someone, an experience that moves you, and you want to be a contributor to society, I believe. I don't know what you think about it.
Yeah, I think actually, it's one of the things when we're looking at composition applicants, one of the big things we look for, because you get people who are applying who are 17 and you get people who are applying who are like 30. And of course, their experience in the world is going to be different. But I want to see the person who has kind of passion for what they're doing. And even if what they're putting on the page looks more elementary, if they look like they're open to growing, that's way more appealing than someone who's coming in with a doctorate who presents a perfect score that follows some thematic development that uses subsystems or something. I always look at this as the heart and the emotion. I mean, I have to confess, there are times when I've written things where I remember when I was writing my opera Cold Mountain, my thought was, I have to figure out a way to make people cry. That was actually my initial goal. It's such a simple goal, something and soon Leah is smiling. That was what I was thinking. I've got to make people cry. So believe me, when people were sobbing at the end, I was like, yes, I did what I wanted. Because the fact is, music and motion and music is actually emotion. The emotion, the thing that people are always saying to me, how do you know it's a good piece? I'm like, did it move you? That's all that really matters. People who listen to country, the Dixie Chicks, who I think now are the Chicks, you listen to rap, who listen to rock, the Rolling Stones, the Beatles. It doesn't matter what the genre is. If you ask people what their favorite music is, they always say, oh, I was just moved by this. It's always a very simple explanation for them. They get intimidated around classical music because they're like, oh, I don't know what to feel and I don't know enough about it. And I'm always like, you don't have to know anything. This could be your very first classical concert. In fact, I'm pretty famous in Philadelphia for when I have concerts with the Philly Orchestra or the opera, I go and get extra tickets that they have. And I take people that I see around the city, like when I go into the deli, they've never been to a classical concert. I'm always taking people in for their first classical concerts. And one of the guys I know actually was hyperventilating. He was so nervous about being in the building. And I'm like, it's okay. It's just music, man. It's like the
Yeah,
pop stuff you're going to.
yeah, but look what we've wrought. I
Yeah.
mean, come on. There's no sense of
Joy.
doors wide open
Yeah,
and come on in. That idea.
it's true.
So,
So this
yeah,
has to happen through all the musicians who are on the screen right now. You guys are the ones
yeah,
who
no pressure.
do it. Yeah, you're the ones who can make this happen. Soon Lee's laughing because I've written she was the winner last year in the Maryland Horn competition, so I've written a song cycle for her. But I thought about this a lot actually when I was writing your piece. I'm thinking, how do you? You're right. It's not a welcoming experience. When they built the Kimmel Center here in Philadelphia, their whole initial idea before they even dug a hole in the ground was it would be an open place where people could hang out. And then they designed a glass box that has guards standing everywhere. You don't feel like you can just walk in there. It's extremely intimidating. So I think sometimes you just have to figure out a different way to present. But the truth is, a lot of this is also going to land with you all because you're coming up through the system. You can rethink these things. I think you have to follow your gut instinct. And if you love what you're doing, just ignore anyone who's naysaying. That was my flaw. Everyone told me at the beginning because I was self-taught. I went off to do my undergrad. I had zero information about classical music. I didn't even know the Beethoven symphonies. And believe me, I heard about it. There's no way you're going to be able to be in music. You started too late. You were self-taught. You don't even know basic theory. Then when I started learning that stuff and I took all the remedial classes, I just kept going. People were saying, you're never going to be able to do this. You'll never have a career in music. And then I decided to do composing. They're like, oh man, Mozart had already written like 400 pieces by the time he was your age. But you know what the thing is? I think you have to search deep down inside yourself and follow your gut instinct. You can pay attention to what people are saying and kind of weigh whether it applies to you. In composition lessons, this is a really hard thing because unlike when I took lessons playing an instrument, you take in a Mozart concerto, your teacher could talk about the fingering and air direction and the phrasing and where you're going to breathe. Composition is completely wide open. There are no rules in a composition lesson. So, and you can take one piece to 4 different teachers, they'll all tell you something different. So I learned through that you kind of have to weigh things for yourself. And there may be things that people tell you that are valuable, but don't ever listen to anyone who tells you you can't. And it never occurred to me personally to think about the fact that I was a woman. I was just interested in music. I just plowed on ahead. Marin?
Yeah, well, I would say though that, you know, there's always something to improve. Sadly, I
It keeps it interesting though.
yeah, I mean, there's always something to improve, and I tried to look at every rejection as an opportunity because there were so many of them. I figured, okay, I've got to really reframe this somehow. So I looked at every rejection, not not for where it came from, but for what I could get from it. And every rejection has, even if it's just a sliver of truth in it. Every bad review has a sliver of truth in it. Every great review has even a smaller sliver of truth in it. Remember that. Only you can really determine whether you're satisfied with what you're doing. So I never interpreted any rejection as a gender-based rejection. I interpreted it as an opportunity to improve myself. And, of course, looking back, I can see that many were related to my gender, I think, but I'm very proud of the fact that I never got a chip on my shoulder and said, oh, well, I didn't get that because I'm a woman. Instead, I said, okay, let me try to figure out how I can be better at what I'm doing. So, um, you know, I do have a few laughs sometimes when I think, God, you would never ask a man that question. Or I'm sure that happens to you too, Jennifer, right? When you say,
It does. I made jokes
would you
about
ask John Corleone this question?
it.
Or, seriously, would you ask Pavo Yarvi this question? No, you
Yeah.
wouldn't.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's the reality of a very sexist society that we live in. I mean, and that's, it's important to have an awareness and a sense of humor about it if you want to survive. It's a tough, it's tough. You have to be your own guide. You have to be your own um, almost teacher and mentor, and really be able to be objective about what you're doing well and what you're not doing well, and give yourself credit for the things you're doing well and try to improve the things you're not doing that well. But nobody else can tell you what's what. I don't
And
think.
you really do have to kind of look at every situation and figure out what you can learn from that situation. Because even all the things that are complete and total rejections, there's something you can learn from
There
them.
is, isn't there? It's true.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not pleasant often, but you see with some distance and the years, and now that we're getting older, we can say that
Yeah.
you start to see, oh yeah, okay, really wasn't ready for that, or maybe I was too driven, or maybe I was too pushy.
Everything's lost. I think we can't underestimate. And boy, Marion probably has an incredible perspective on this because of Orc Kids. I think it's imperative that I don't know. I often feel like it's not enough just to have the kids come in once and hear something. It feels like there needs to be more there. But I have to admit, as a composer, I'm never in a position where I'm given voice on that. So I don't ponder it as much, because normally composers are like moved around like little pawns. You just go over here, they're like, do this, do that. Since I'm not someone who programs, but I try to help when someone's asking for, programs. And I've actually done commissions just for education programs where they're studying something. I think Marin she probably has a much more comprehensive answer on this.
Oh, thanks for that setup. I don't know about that, but I, I think I'm a great believer that okay, so I became a parent pretty late in life. So I have a son who's now almost 17. And when he was little, I was just I was amazed, that he could recognize Strauss and recognize this, and then I realized that every kid can do that. It wasn't just him. That every kid is really born a genius. And we just suck that genius out of them by not challenging them, by not allowing them to achieve, by putting limits on our expectations. And, this, I think the joy for me is watching these kids in the Orchids program um, just, just really thrive and excel at what they're doing and be so comfortable with classical music, the classical idiom, going to the Meyerhof, going to the concert hall, that when someone interviewed them and said, well, would you want to be a conductor? They said, well, if Marin can do it, anybody can do it. This to me is, and I believe that's exactly true. It's not about being, I mean, of course, a little bit of talent helps too, but it's really about opportunity. And if we don't create opportunity, then nobody has the chance. And I talk about this in terms of gender equality, in terms of racial equality, in terms of inclusiveness, that we have fallen down on all of these. And I I think instead of looking at what we do as achieving some kind of, perfection, excellence, why don't we look at what we do from terms of inclusion instead, of creating diversity, equity, and inclusion, that everything we do should tick those three boxes. Otherwise, don't do it. But I mean, you would think I'm speaking a language never heard before on the planet when I come out with this. I mean, and so I'm used to eating dinner alone. I'm okay on it.
I think it helps. I mean, it's interesting. I teach at Curtis, and Marin, you're still teaching at Peabody, right? Yeah, but it's funny because I visit so many universities and I do master classes, and sometimes I'll do residencies where I'm there for a solid week. I get to know a lot of the performers. That's why I've got like 3 Facebook pages, because I keep hitting my limits on the 5,000 limit of Facebook. And people say, you can't possibly know all those people. I'm like, well, actually, I've met all of them. So it is important, I think, for people to have mentors. It does help a lot. And because we all hit those holes in the road, and having someone that you can turn to and ask questions of, but also just to kind of get I don't know, it's bits of wisdom, but it's also bits of strength, I think. I think it's imperative, actually. I think it makes my life richer. I feel like I learn from the people that I have mentored through the year. I'm learning from everyone. I'm saying, I was out at the Academy last year, and I feel like I learned a lot, not only with the patron dinners, but also talking to the musicians and the singers. And so in a certain way, I feel like people are still mentoring me. It's kind of an amazing thing to be able to, that's the thing I love about music. It's a small enough world this can actually be possible, but I think mentors are definitely important. I think of Marin as a mentor. She probably doesn't think of that, but I think she's such an amazing example. Watching her deal with orchestras when there's some guy in a trombone section that's giving her a really hard time. I mean, I have learned to respond to responses in orchestras by watching the way Marin responds. She always diffuses the situation with humor. I'm like, oh, it's so brilliant. So I always tell all of my students, you should see Marin Alsop doing this. She handles this so well.
Yeah, but now don't give them the impression that I'm challenged a lot. So yeah, of course, mentoring is I think mentoring is critical, but I think we underestimate how little is really needed to be a mentor. It can be one sentence. It can be the kind thing that you say to someone that after you hear them sing something and you say, I just love the way you phrased that. These these things can really make a huge difference in people's lives. And so mentoring doesn't just have to be from someone older to someone younger. It can be from peer to peer. It can be from younger to older as well. It depends, I think. And I think to remember that as someone who mentors people, you get much more out of it than they do in the end. That's always the way with giving. The person giving gets much more than the person receiving. Um, that's something we've gotten away from in the United States, sadly. I think there are a lot of people that I'm very hopeful about. I mean, I think you know I'm a great fan of Greta Thunberg. I think that uh, that it's not just in music for me, but it's across the gamut. Also, I see I really see a lot of young people being deeply involved in work with community, and that's very inspiring for me. I see the leadership of the Orchids program, and I'm really excited about the future they have, not just with orchids, but in the industry. So I see people, trying to affect change. It's just we really must support them. This is the challenge, right? And it's difficult because we're not controlling the financial end of the spectrum. Um, so anyway, Jennifer, you want to mention some people?
Yeah, I actually think I have a 25-year-old brother, and I'm always talking to him about this. And I have to say, I'm actually really inspired by your generation, all of you here, because I'm finding that the humanity and the belief in all people being equal. And he's always saying to me, I don't understand why there aren't more women or people of color in this. That doesn't make any sense. And I realized that the generation that is coming up now through the system has kind of a better view of how the world should be. So I have a lot of hope in that. It sounds simple, but it's across the board. Like, it's in the environment, and it's thinking about education and treating people well and trying to make the world better for absolutely everyone. So if that's a real general answer, I'm always blown away by the young composers coming up through the system. They amaze me, the talent level. They're so much better than I was at their age. It's staggering to me, but I feel like young musicians coming up have access to so much more now in terms of the internet and I guess recordings and even things like this, the Music Academy. I mean, I can remember when I was going through school, I think there was like Aspen and Tanglewood. There wasn't much more beyond that. So it's really the proliferation of these sorts of things, I think, kind of encourages and helps. And I don't know, I feel like it's your generation that's probably one of the most inspiring things I've encountered lately. And maybe it is all the conversations with my little brother. I'm constantly asking him, what are you guys thinking and feeling? So even hearing him talk about, because I think he's about the age of many of you are. It's really inspiring to think about how they're thinking about the world's problems, and they're really serious about solving the things. And it gives me hope, to be quite honest. Here's the thing, we practice not always for performance. Sometimes we're practicing just to grow our skill. I mean, I often think of practicing, I tell the composers this all the time. I'm like, don't just write 15 minutes a day. If you were a pianist, you're not going to have a concert career by practicing piano for 15 minutes a day. You're working the muscle up here as much as you are whatever it is you play. You're just working to make your art better. And I think you just, I know it's discouraging. I've talked to a lot of students. I know there's a kind of a low level depression going on. They're like, how am I going to function as a musician if I can't be around all the people who play in orchestra and band, the brass quintet, the string quartet? It's something we're all wrestling with. But the thing is, I think you can figure out ways to just proceed along and think about the things you want to work on, because we're always, you know what, I've been out of school a long time. And because I write pieces, it means I often, there's like, I'm writing pieces that are going to be premiered in a year. So I'm just like, well, we just keep making our art because it actually feeds something in me anyway. And there are, this is a new era. I have to admit, we're all kind of wondering the same thing. And the teachers are worrying about the exact same thing. How do we get the students to feel involved? I'm trying to figure out how to get the composers to feel involved. They're not even playing an instrument, but I want to get them connected to all the other musicians in the school, none of whom are on the school grounds. So you kind of you're going to have to reach in deep, because if you can get through this and you can keep playing, you're going to do great things. And just think, the things you invest in the first semester when we're supposed to, that stuff is going to yield things for you down the road. And some of it may be a decade down the road. I mean, I think back to moments where I had a hard time in undergrad, and I realize now some of the things I went through helped me literally 20 years after I left school. I just couldn't see it at the time. So you try to make the most of every day. And I think about Carol Yonch, the tuba player in Philly. I mean, she got that job when she was an undergraduate at University of Michigan. She did it by staying consistent, working on her art, exploring, questioning, thinking. So there are other ways you can learn besides going into your lesson to play. There are a lot of other ways. You just kind of have to expand your mind a little bit and think about other things you can explore.
This is it's a really great question, and so many of my students are struggling with this question too. Um, I would say that, to be a great musician requires more than playing your instrument. It requires an understanding of context, of pieces, especially if you play tuba, where you're the foundation of these scores. I would try to start looking at um, looking at music in a different way, maybe from the structural perspective, and training yourself. You have this, instead of looking at this as a loss, look at it as, again, an opportunity, that you have this found time. You can't practice tuba 10 hours a day. We know that, right? So I don't know how much you practice a day. Maximum 3 hours, I imagine. And then, but you still feel that you have 4 hours a day that you could devote to something else. Maybe make yourself a plan. It's amazing if you just start down a path. In 6 months, you look back and you say, oh my gosh, look what I've accomplished. Look, I worked on my German every day. And, it's not bad now. On starting March 14th, that's what I did. Because that's what I wanted to accomplish. So I would say that I don't know you personally, but I'm sure there are things that you've been wanting to investigate and explore. And don't just do Brussels sprouts. Also have some chocolate. Do something that you really want to do too. Don't just do things you don't want to do because you won't continue either. I don't know.
Something.
I like Brussels sprouts myself,
You know,
not as much as chocolate.
it's actually a good point. There's going to be a point where you're going to look back 10 years from now and you're going to say, oh man, I wish I didn't realize how amazing it was to have that very still time where I wasn't traveling and doing everything that people told me I needed to do. I wish I had done such and such. I had a conversation with Josh Bell a couple of weeks ago. We were talking about a project, and he said it was the most amazing thing for him suddenly to be given this time, because now he can sit back and play slowly through music that he never gets to do because he's always racing to his next solo appearance. He said, so I'm like going back and I'm investigating Bach. He's just playing through Bach. And so this is going to be a time you're going to look back. It doesn't seem like this now, but down the road, you're going to look back as this is a moment where you had kind of a stillness that doesn't exist in life.
Yeah, and you'll tell your kids, oh man, when we went through the COVID and I was, I found my center, and your kids will be like, oh God, not this again, right?
Well, I can tell you there were a couple of things that people said that were really key. I remember Fran Richard, who used to head ASCAP, the Symphonic Concert Division, said to me once to never say no. She said, when you get more established, you can say no to things, but say yes to everything. My flute teacher said, always do your absolute best because you don't know who's going to be sitting in the audience. And that actually, my whole career has hinged on that one piece of advice, because sometimes the only thing you can control is your performance, and you don't know who's in the audience. And sometimes it's major. I mean, I can't tell you, my helping out a colleague whose parts were ruined when he was hand copying and this cat peed on his parts ended up leading, believe it or not, through a series of events to the commission that changed my life, the Concerto for Orchestra for Philadelphia Orchestra. I never would have guessed that would be. So helping out was a big thing, but doing the best. And the last piece of advice, George Crumb once told me, in the end, all that matters is what it sounds like. And I thought, geez, I've been studying in college for 12 years, doing all this theory and stuff, and that's all that matters. Let me think about that a minute. Marin?
Gosh, I don't know that. Mm, I think that sometimes we get obsessed with our striving again for this perfection, and we lose sight of just existing and appreciating the moment. And I think my mentor Leonard Bernstein, really gave me the permission to be myself. So I would say, that your best asset is yourself, and don't ever underestimate that. Each of you is entirely unique, brings something entirely unique to the table, and um, you each have something unique to say. So, never forget that.